It's Wednesday. It's Facebook Live time. So hello to everybody that's tuning into Facebook Live, whoever you might be. Hannah's going to be taking care of you today. So send your comments to her or chat with her, and she will amaze you, right? She will amaze you. So it's Mark 11, and we did make some progress last week. So that's awesome. And we finished, actually we're Mark 12, because we finished I'll tell you by what authority I'm doing these things. So it's actually Mark 12. Awesome. So it's the parable of the tenants. So Mark chapter 12, parable of the tenants. And let's talk about parables. How do you read a parable? Parables generally, and I've said this before, have one specific truth or idea or thought or taught, as they say, thought or point that they're trying to make. You don't take a parable literally. Or sometimes people would say you can understand a parable as a parable, but don't take it literalistically. And that matters here. That matters here. And I'll point that out to you why that matters. I'll point out why in a parable you're looking for the one main thought, and don't get too into the weeds about, well, why did he say it this way, or why didn't he do that? I'm going to explain that to you in just a minute. So let me wow you with my voice. He then began to speak to them in parables. A man planted a vineyard, and he put a wall around it, dug a pit for the winepress, and built a watchtower. And you might say, well, why do all of that? Well, because back in the good old days, that's what you did to protect your stuff, your assets, right? That's what you did. Now, the winepress was built low because it was going to be a place where you're going to be holding a lot of liquid. So it needed, it needed a reservoir type area, but nonetheless, this is all about the days in which they lived. So he put a wall around it, dug a pit for the winepress, and built a watchtower. He then rented the vineyard to some farmers. Oh, Jack and Jerry, you got to watch farmers. You just never know what farmers are going to do. He rented a vineyard to some farmers, and then he went away on a journey. At harvest time, he sent a servant to the tenants to collect from them some of the fruit of the vineyard, right? Rent. But they seized him, beat him, and sent him away empty-handed. Then he sent another servant to them, and they struck this man on the head and treated him shamefully. He sent still another, and that one they killed, and he sent many others. Some of them they beat, some of them they killed. So servants sent, let me put that up here. Servants sent, and some they beat, and some they killed. That doesn't really matter, other than I'm going to just help you understand how you should read a parable. But we'll get back to that. Keep reading. Verse 6. He had one left to send, a son, whom he loved. He sent him last of all, saying, "They will respect my son." But the tenants said to one another, "This is the heir. Come, let's kill him, and the inheritance will be ours." So they took him and killed him and threw him out of the vineyard. End of story. What then will the owner of the vineyard do? He will come and kill those tenants and give the vineyard to others. Haven't you read this in Scripture? The stone the builders rejected has become the capstone. The Lord has done this, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Then they looked for a way to arrest him because they knew he had spoken the parable against them, but they were afraid of the crowd, so they left him and went away. So, those of you that are watching on Facebook Live and those of you that are here in the room, let me just explain again a little bit more about the parables. Why did I say that you shouldn't take it literally or literalistically? Well, because if you're reading this like it really happened, you might say, well, why did the owner keep sending servants if they were being beat up and killed? I mean, when do you stop sending people? Like, how many have to die before you come? But that's not the point of the parable. You might say, well, in verse 9 it says that the owner of the vineyard is going to come and kill them. So, do we literally feel like that's what's going to happen? No, that's not literally what's going to happen. Remember, it's a parable. It's a story. it's illustrating truth. Now, to continue this thought about how to manage or handle or understand parables, what's the parable about in your opinion? Karen?
We're the people on the earth, right? And the sin in the world. And then he sent other people to the world, like to share to the world,
Okay.
the sinners, but then he had to send his only son, it's about Jesus.
Okay.
He's the final one that he sent.
Right? So that is partially it, but dig even deeper. Ed?
He was talking to the people of Israel, and he was referring to the Sadducees and Pharisees killing the prophets.
Bingo. Right? So, this is the parable. This is Jesus' way of speaking to the people of his day and age and speaking to the history of Israel about how they've treated the messengers that God has sent, right? So God is the owner of the vineyard. God owns everything, right? And God has in a sense, let Israel enjoy the land and the fruit of the land. And now, we have the prophets that are going back to speak to Israel, to turn them from, as Karen said, from their sin and from their evil ways. And every time God, the owner of the vineyard, sent a prophet back to the farmers, sorry, Jack, killed them or beat them up, right? All the messengers that God sent through the Old Testament, they were all beat up or they were all killed. So Jesus is telling the story remember, he's got a Jewish audience in front of them about the history of Israel and how they have treated God's messengers through all the ages. And then it looks into the future, and the last one God is going to send is his one and only son. Remember, it says whom he loved. And they're going to do what? They're going to kill him. So it speaks about Israel's past and the treatment of the messengers, the prophets, and also what they're going to do to Jesus. So this is the big picture that you're looking at. You're not wondering, well, like, why does this owner allow all these people to get beat up and killed? Or, boy, the owner's really mean at the end. He's going to go in there and he's going to kill everybody. Like, if we understand this is about God and Israel, does this mean like God's a really angry God or these kinds of things? No, the big picture is this. Jesus is showing them what Israel has been like in the treatment of God and the messengers that God has sent to them and what they're going to do to Jesus, obviously via the cross. So this is the one specific truth and point. You're not supposed to look at a parable and say, well, you know what? It doesn't seem like God's a very moral God. He's going to come back and kill the farmers. Or it seems like God doesn't care about his messengers, that he keeps sending them. Even though he knows they're all dying, he keeps sending them. God's not a very compassionate God. That's digging too much into the weeds in a parable. That's not what you want to do. You want to stick with the one specific truth, idea, thought, or point, and this is it. Jesus is calling Israel out on their sin, on their treatment of the prophets, on the treatment of the messengers that God has sent to them, and that they keep rejecting. And at the end, there will be accountability. Right? The owner's going to come back. And so you get this passage again from the Old Testament. The stone the builders rejected has become the capstone. The Lord has done this, and it is marvelous in our eyes. This is just, it's messianic. It just points to Jesus as the one who is the capstone, the linchpin, the thing that holds everything together. He is the fulfillment of all that God is going to do or will do, and they reject him. So that's what's going on in this parable. So, as Karen said, or Ed said, with the Sadducees, the religious leaders, right? If you're a religious leader and you've got a little bit of, biblical acumen, a little bit of spiritual understanding, you know that Jesus is speaking that against that generation and basically saying you're just like the rest. God sends you prophets and messengers and you beat them up and you kill them. And here I am, the last one, God's son, and guess what you want to do with me, right? It says at the end they were looking for a way to arrest him, but they wouldn't because they feared the people. So that's what this is all about. Verse 12, they looked for a way to arrest him, but they knew he had spoken because they knew he had spoken the parable against them. But they were afraid of the crowd, and they left him and they went on their way, right? In other words, they were just waiting for another chance. Somewhere else. We'll get him somewhere else. We'll just bide our time. But it's about that constant rejection of God's messengers. All right? God has been so patient with them. And that's history to us. What I like to think about now is God has been so patient with us. So in just some random reading today, it had nothing to do with the lesson, but in some random reading today, I was reading in Isaiah, and let me go back. And Isaiah 65, I was just doing some random reading, verse 1. And it just reminded me of the grace of God and how God reaches out to people that you least expect, right? He starts with the people of Israel, his chosen, and he's going to finish with them. We know the times of the Gentiles will come to an end, and Israel, which has been cut off, will be grafted back in as the natural vine. We know that. Romans teaches us that. But look what it says in Isaiah 65. Isaiah 65, verse 1. The Bible says this, I revealed myself to those who did not ask for me, and I was found by those who did not seek me, to a nation that did not call on my name. And I said, here I am, here I am. Now, isn't that what he's done for us? Now, I realize specifically that's Gentiles as a whole. But that's us uniquely and personally, right? You know, I revealed myself to those who did not ask for me, right? There is a sense in us when we begin to feel the convicting power of the Holy Spirit, the tug on our heart from God to us, that from that point forward, we're looking for God now, right? But you have to understand that it all starts with him. That when we were dead in trespasses and sins, we were not wandering around saying to people, have you seen God? I'm looking for Jesus. I want to get saved. I'm looking to repent. I really need to get my life right, right? That only happens after the work of the Holy Spirit begins with us. Tom Russell comes on Thursdays, and Tom is really, and he sits in that corner, and he's really good to remind us, right? That we were dead in trespasses and sin. We were spiritually dead. That which is spiritually dead cannot reach out to God unless God ignites the spark in us. It starts with him. It doesn't start with us. It starts with him. And this is it. I revealed myself to those who did not ask for me. I was found by those who did not seek me, to a nation that did not call on my name. And I said, isn't this awesome? Here I am. Here I am. Here I am. I'm right here. Right? Israel had all of the benefits. That's what this parable is about. Let me write this up here in Mark 12. That's what this parable is about in Mark 12, right? They've had God from the beginning. God said, I've chosen you, and I'm going to set you as the apple of my eye. And I've chosen you not because you're a great and numerous nation, but I chose you because you're small and puny and weak, right? And you can't depend on your strength. You need me. And I reached out, and I took a man, and I made a people into a nation. And I've blessed you, and I've given you an inheritance, and I've covenanted myself to you. And I've sent my prophets to you time and time after again to keep you on the straight and narrow. And every time I sent one, you killed one. And yet to us, here I am. Here I am. Folks, that's called grace. That's the marvelous, wonderful grace that we sing about and talk about, right? To a people that wasn't looking for him. And yet to those that should have recognized who Jesus was, should have understood the scriptures, the prophetic ties through time. And it's like, you know what? If we're going to do everything we can to get rid of this guy, like the owner's son has come, and we don't want anything to do with him. So this was spoken against those, and those are all that are gathered there, right? But we know in that approach that it's the religious leaders specifically. Not totally, but specifically. We know that the nation itself is guilty of sin and not just the leaders. Any thoughts or comments on that? Yeah, Ed, go ahead.
I was thinking, like, when I read this earlier today, I was thinking, like, so many times people would say, well, what did that parable mean? But this time, God made it known to the Pharisees what it meant.
Yeah. So Ed's making the comment, for those of you that are Facebook Live, that sometimes we're not sure what the parables mean. Sometimes even the disciples didn't understand the parables, but with this parable, they knew exactly. They knew that this parable was spoken against them, right? That saying these days, it comes from movies. You talking to me? You talking to me? In other words, like, was that meant for me? And the answer is, yep. Yeah, that was meant for you. Yeah, and if you didn't get it, like, you should, because it was meant for you, right? So that's what's going on there. Yeah, some of the parables are a little bit more challenging sometimes to understand, and that just means sometimes we have to dig in and do a little more work. We know that initially in the Gospel of Mark, the disciples were always asking Jesus, what does this mean? And Jesus was occasionally perplexed by their lack of understanding. But if you remember way back when I started this in the spring, I'm pretty sure I took time to remind you that the Bible tells us that Jesus would come, and the Bible predicted that he would teach in parables on purpose. Because and again, this is just a reflex back to the spring, but this is important because that was a long time ago, wasn't it? Remember the spring?
Well, that's when COVID started.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, it's just like that feels like 20 years ago. But anyways, back in the spring when I started this on Facebook Live, I mentioned to you that not only did the parables have, one specific truth or thought that you're looking for, but Jesus taught in parables because only those who really wanted to know what he was saying would dig into it. So it was a way of separating those who were just casually interested in the things of God and those who really wanted to know, right? So it was just kind of a test. Are you willing to do the hard work and dig in and figure it out? Or it's okay if it goes by you? And that's why they're there. They're knowable. Go ahead, Carmen.
No, I just had a thought. In verse 2 it said how he sent the slave in order to receive some of the produce of the vineyard, and that word some, and I thought it really does show, Jesus is showing it like their heart, right? They didn't own it, they didn't buy it, they didn't deserve all of it, and how gracious God was. He wasn't asking for all of it.
No, some
of,
yeah.
right? And so again, how they thought they deserved all of it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's grace we don't deserve.
Yeah. I'm not sure of the passage where exactly it's found, but I think it's that passage where God says, come, let us reason together. And in the back and forth, God listens to Israel as Israel basically says, God, you've been a burden to us. And God says, how have I burdened you? And they just, again, right, they just see it as a burden, as a weight. God's pouring grace and love and giving them gifts and everything else. And they somehow feel like now they're obligated. And this obligation to the God that's done everything for them is somehow a burden, right? Which is fuzzy thinking at best. It's like your 5-year-old saying, you're making me get up in the morning and eat and get dressed and clean. It's really getting old, Mom. Well, it's January. You can go outside naked if you want, but you're going to find that getting you up and dressed and cleaned and all that's a good thing, right? It's not a burden, right? So, yeah, they've got some fuzzy thinking going on there for sure. So we're on, I think it's page 52 of your notes. What's the parable all about? It's about Israel rejecting God and the messengers of God. Who is the parable directed to? Well, it was directed to everybody that was listening, but particular, those who had religious authority, those who kept rejecting, those who had the power to kill, to destroy, to distort, right? But it's directed to two of us. But again, right in that passage there, I don't have the passage, Isaiah 65, verse 1 there, and it might even be verse 1 and verse 2 about here I am, here I am. It's marvelous grace. Go ahead, Ed.
Isaiah 1:18 is come now, let us reason together.
Is that the one? Okay, so Isaiah 1:18 is the one, let us come reason together. Let me just check it out there. Okay, so that's part of it, but the one that I'm looking at must be coming from somewhere else, where it talks about the burden. I don't know if you got time on the internet, Ed, to look that up. It's if you don't, that's fine. We don't have to have it, but it's interesting, right? It's just about sometimes how we say, hey God, I know you saved me, and I know you delivered me from sin, and I know you've been really gracious to me, but wow, sometimes serving you is just such hard work, And that's just bogus, right? That's just bogus. That's just a lie. So let's go to taxes, everybody's favorite topic. Taxes. I got a government document in the mail. You probably did too. And, right? About you're old enough now to qualify for Canada pension, right? Anytime I get a brown envelope in the government, I'm always afraid that I've underpaid my taxes. It's like, oh, they finally caught up with me. Yeah. I'm the guy that has saved, 15 years of taxes, just in case. Not so much on paper, but, on nerd sticks. I've got everything electronically saved just in case. I got this fear that eventually something's going to happen, that I've done something wrong. I would never try to steal from the government, but occasionally I can just be dumb. So I'm assuming that maybe one of these days. Taxes, we love taxes. So let's deal with Mark and taxes. Later they sent some Pharisees and Herodians. Remember I talked about the unholy alliance between Pharisees and Herodians? Herodians were the group of people that were trying to keep Herod on the throne. They were pagans. They were Gentiles. There was some Jewish blood, they say, mixed up in the Herodians somehow. I don't know if it's through some of the women they married or something like that. I don't know all the story, but they certainly saw themselves as legitimate people on the throne. But they, I think mostly they're Edomites. If you trace their ancestry back, I think they're Edomites. So they're relatives of Israel, but they're not Jews. And the Pharisees should have been in total opposition to Herodians because Herod, wasn't their guy and he wasn't one of them really. But he built a marvelous, the family of Herod, right, built a marvelous Jewish temple. And after having their temple destroyed, they were very excited to have their temple restored. And even though Herod built it differently in some ways, they had their temple back, and some Jews felt indebted to that family. But nonetheless, Pharisees and Herodians should have been like oil and vinegar or two magnets, right? They should have not connected, but they're aligned here because they both see Jesus as a threat. So your enemy has become my enemy, and even though you were my enemy, we've got a bigger enemy now, so let's work together. So they sent some of the Pharisees and Herodians to Jesus for the purpose of what? To catch him in his words, right? They want to mess him up. They came to him and said, "Teacher, we know that you are a man of integrity." So when people start buttering you up right away, and we've learned that, eh? When somebody you don't know starts buttering you up right away, we're always wondering, yeah. I mean, we've learned that, right? It makes us a little bit nervous. What's going on here, right? We know that you're a man of integrity, and that's true. You aren't swayed by men. That's true. Because you pay no attention to who they are, but teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. That's all true. Everything they said was true. It wasn't that it was a lie, it was true. But they were using that as a means to entrap Jesus. Is it right to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Should we pay or shouldn't we? Now, here's what we need to know about taxes that you already know. How did the Jews feel about Rome?
Not really fond of them.
Not really fond of them. So there's the understatement of the evening. Rome was the mortal enemy of Jews, right? They're a conquered people. Herod is the puppet king, but Caesar pulls the strings. And one of the things that these conquered nations have to do is pay taxes to Caesar, because it costs a lot of money to be Caesar, right? You've got the Roman armies that are literally all over the world as they knew it back in those days. I mean, from trying to beat up crazy Scots, which never went too well, and Hadrian's Wall, to going into parts in and around the Caspian Sea, over to Armenia, into Babylon, and down that way, and then all across North Africa, right? Like there were legions of Roman soldiers all over the place, and as far north as Germany, right? And that costs money to keep those guys out on the field. I mean, they can ransack and pillage and a little bit so much, but it costs money to keep those guys out there. And it costs money to keep the generals out there. And what Caesar would like to do with his generals often is give them vast estates, big chunks of land, big estates. And that was his way of keeping all of the people with power on their side. So it was basically bribes, right? You could call it a salary, but it's basically bribes. That costs a lot of money. So you had to tax everything, right? Why did Joseph and Mary go to Bethlehem? Yeah, to be counted so they could be taxed, right? So Israel versus Rome. And then Rome or Herod or whoever had tax collectors. Can you name me a couple from the New Testament?
Matthew.
Yes, Zacchaeus.
Huh? Was it Zacchaeus?
Yep.
Yeah. Did I spell it wrong?
Man.
Yeah, no.
What's that? I need another A? I need another A?
Sure.
I don't know.
Whatever.
I don't know. Not feeling it. So Herod or Rome would hire Jewish people to tax their own people, right? Tax collectors. That's why these guys had no friends. Commonly, maybe not always, but commonly, tax collectors took the chunk for Rome and
Themselves.
so when you paid taxes to Rome through a Jewish person, that was almost insufferable. But you also knew that these guys were getting rich off of that too, because again, maybe not always, but often they would put a little aside for themselves, right? So tax collecting and taxes, this is a big deal. So let me get a poll. Let me just do a straw poll here. How many of you in the room and those by Facebook Live enjoy paying taxes? Any on Facebook Live like paying tax? Any? No love there either, right? So, you got income tax. I think the tax I like the least, to be honest, is property tax. Is that just me?
No, I hate GST.
Yeah, and then you got that too.
Like that.
Yeah, GST,
Yeah.
HST harmonized. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, Canada taxes pretty well. I mean, I'm not going to get political. But Canada taxes pretty well. Now, some people feel that, you get a good bang for your buck. That's good. That's fine. But nobody really likes paying taxes, even if you think that your taxes are well spent and that you're doing good by them because you've got health care or garbage pickup or street lights, whatever, right? But nobody likes paying taxes. So The reason why they used the tax question was,
They don't want to part with their money.
yeah, but why did they use it with Jesus? Why did they use the tax issue with Jesus? Sharon?
If he spoke in favor of Rome, pay Caesar, he'd be a traitor to Israel. If he said, in favor of Israel, Rome would be on him.
Right.
So they were trying to get him in the middle.
Yeah.
Get him down.
Right. So what Sharon is saying at the back of the room is that this is a no-win situation. If Rome's okay, Israel likes you. If Israel's okay, Rome doesn't like you. So it's a no-win. So the whole idea is to get him pinned down, that if he comes out on one side or the other, he's going to be wrong with certain people, right? He's going to get into trouble. So it's one of these questions, guys. Ladies, go to sleep. Anybody on Facebook Live that's watching that's a lady, go to sleep. It's like this, Jerry. No, I can't even pick on Jerry. I need, because Gay's in the room. And I need you to go home healthy. And I'm setting you up for failure here, so I'm not going to do it. It's like when a woman says to her husband, does this dress make me look fat? And you just want to leave the room. There's no good answer here, right?
Silence is gold.
Because if she asked you that question, you already know she thinks it makes her look, or she wouldn't ask, Gary. Right? And if you think it does, hypothetically speaking,
You're dead.
It's the mirror.
and if you say no and it does, you're a liar. So you're caught in the middle here on this one, eh? Now again, this may not be the best illustration, but it's a whole no-win situation here, right? This is a no-win situation. Sharon nailed it. Like it doesn't. Whatever you say, you're going to be wrong. But apparently, Jesus is a little smarter than this. But Jesus knew their hypocrisy, and he says to them in verse 15, "Why are you trying to trap me?" And he says, "Bring me a denarius, bring me a coin, bring me a Roman coin, and let me look at it." And they brought him a coin, and he asked them, "Whose portrait's on the coin? And whose inscription?" And they reply, "Caesar's." And then he wows them. "So, give to Caesar's what is Caesar, and to God what is God." Right? So what this means, folks, is you got to pay taxes. Right? And it says they were amazed at him. Like when they thought they had him pinned down, that there was no good answer. Because remember, right, they're looking to accuse him, right? They're looking for a way to accuse him. They want him to be tripped up either on some kind of Jewish law or tradition or on Roman law in order to accuse him, try him, and then hopefully convict him, right? Because if he says don't pay taxes, then he's a zealot. Right? Then he's a rebel. Then he's trying to stir up controversy. Get him. If they say, the other side, then he loses favor with Jews, and those that have been following him and listening to him and loving him all of a sudden turn against him because they say he's pro-Roman. Right? So he wows them with all of this. Now, the point of this, again, isn't trying to tell you whether or not you should pay taxes or where your loyalty should lie. The point of this is simply, right, that Jesus is able to understand and discern, their motives, their reasons for lying, trying to entrap him, that they're not really looking for an honest answer to an honest question, right? They're just trying to get him in a very uncomfortable position in order to entrap him, but they couldn't. So that's the gist of this. There's no moral to the lesson here. There's no deeper truth in that sense. If you wanted to dig it a little deeper, you know what? There are certain things that belong to God and that you should devote to God, and there's certain things that belong to the world, right? If you want a little more depth on that, go to Romans 13. And I don't think this is a stretch. This isn't in my notes, but it just kind of occurred to me. Right? So, without getting too political, we're in a situation now where we're in the middle of a pandemic. At least that's what we're told. Now, I know that there are people out there that believe this is all a hoax. Or some people believe that there is a pandemic, but it's not as bad as it sounds. And then there's other people that think it's as bad as it sounds, right? I'm not, folks, I want you to know my heart. I'm not trying to stir up controversy here. I'm not. I just want to use this to make a point, right? So we're at the point now. I was watching the news when I was home today at lunch, and there's a guy in Toronto that was told to close his restaurant, and he did, and then he reopened it today, right? Anybody see that, right? Because he's tired of the government telling him what to do. And there's probably all of us in here can sympathize with that at some level, right? We can. The guy's trying to make a living, right? And the government's saying, well, we understand that. We just like people not to die because they went to your restaurant. And we can understand that at some level too, right? We understand that there's, like, God bless people in government these days. If they ever needed the wisdom of Solomon, it's these days, right? Because I think everybody just wants to chop the baby in half, right? I say that to say this whole idea, when do we listen to government? When do we render unto Caesar what is Caesar's and unto God what is God's, right? Now, I'm not here tonight to try to answer that question for you. All I'm saying is we understand, right? There are things that belong to civil government authorities and things that we should obey and do. And then there is probably a line somewhere, and I'm not saying we're there, but there's probably a line somewhere where as Christians we'll say, well, we're willing to go so far on some things, but no further. Now again, and I'm not saying like the pandemic is a health issue, an economic issue. Some people would say, well, it's a spiritual issue, it's a freedom of gathering and meeting issue. I understand that, but primarily it's a health issue and it's an economic issue. And so, we in the church have been cooperating with the government saying, we understand that it's a health issue. We don't want to spread COVID-19. We believe it's a real thing. So we're willing to do our part. But there are some churches we know and some movements that say we're not willing to do that. We either think this is a hoax or we think it's way overstated. So we're not willing to do that. And government can't tell us what to do. So if we want to do our thing, we're going to do our thing. And if our thing is a bad thing and a dumb thing, I guess we'll pay the consequences. But it's up to us to do that. So this fits in with Romans 13. Everyone must submit himself to governing authorities. For there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, he or she who rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted. And those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. Now, the interesting part of this, and I realize I've traveled a little bit here, I've bunny trailed a little bit here, is this is written during Rome. This is an evil government. It is a pagan government. These people murder and enslave and pillage and rape and everything else that's completely going on in that part of the world. And Paul writes, Paul is a Roman citizen and is glad to be, because there are rights and privileges that come with being a Roman citizen. Paul is a Roman citizen, and on one occasion at least, he uses that for his advantage. And yet Paul says, wherever you are, whether it's Rome or some other government, you need to submit to those who are in authority. God has established authority, and if you rebel against the local authority, you rebel against God. And that's true to a point. We render unto Caesar what is Caesar's and unto God what is God. It's when it gets to the point where, again, you can't worship Jesus. You can't preach the gospel. You can't do this because we're making laws and we're persecuting you because we're making laws now that are completely contrary to the gospel, right?
Nazi Germany.
Yeah, right. Right. I mean, and we know that Christians paid the price in that day for preaching the gospel, because in the early days of the Roman Empire, it was Caesar as Lord, not Jesus as Lord. And it was polytheistic. And so some Christians died for preaching Jesus as God's son and the soon coming king. And they saw Jesus as a rival to Caesar, and they put Christians to death. They knew it was against the law, and they were willing to pay the price for it. And some of them were killed. read Hebrews 11, right? Or 10 or 11. So, I'm not saying that, I'm not saying that what we're going through now is the same thing as then, because I don't think it is. But we do struggle with the render unto Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's, right? I mean, we all have to sort that out, but it doesn't come down to paying taxes or those kinds of things. It comes down to when you have a hostile government that clearly begins to teach, you can't believe this, you can't teach this, you can't preach this, you can't live this. Just for being a Christian, we're going to lock you up and put you in jail. Right? There's lines there, pretty clear lines that we understand, who we should honor and when we should obey. So, and I understand in the day in which we're living, there's some fuzzy now. It's fuzzy. It's a little fuzzy in some areas. But I think, we do our best to honor what God's word is saying here. Verse 6, this is why you pay taxes. For the authorities are God's servants who give their full time to governing. Give everyone what you owe him. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor. So folks, pay your taxes. Even though I firmly believe my property taxes are too high. Yeah. Who can afford to move? You sell your house for $500,000, you got to buy another one for $600,000. Who can afford to move? The only people getting rich off of this housing market are your kids, whom when you die are going to landfill when they sell your house. Mitchell's counting the money. Oh, you know Mitchell, so you get that better than most, yeah.
That's capital gain, still loses.
Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, right? Yeah. I don't know. Again, these are challenging times. These are difficult times. But read the whole Bible. Romans has lots to say. Now, you talk about governments now that are like Nazi Germany, right? Or Italy, or any communist country, or any country that's run by a dictator. Like, it's easy to spot that, right? That's the easy thing, right? I remember when I went to Cuba on my first missions trip, and one of the pastors was under house arrest. It made international news. It made the Pentecostal testimony. And we just happened to be there when it all went down. So some of our team went in and visited with them and brought them a nice Spanish study Bible and all that, and got to spend some time with them. It was kind of really cool, actually. For us, they were still under house arrest. And why? Because they're preaching the gospel. That was it. Cuba's got lots of nice churches. You can go to all kinds of churches, nice ones, or you can go to the ones that are just out in the countryside and they let it go on. It's all monitored. They know what's going on. But when they decide to put their foot down, they put their foot down. And it's random. They just pick a town, a church, or a person. So when we went into one village, you got to remember this. We left Camagüey in central Cuba. We were going to another little town where there was a house church. And do you know there was like a guard gate to go from one town to another? You had to go through a gate. Like, when you see the beginning of Hogan's Heroes flashback, and they've got the Germans at the gate, letting the gate, it was one of those. So we're going from Camagüey to this little town to have supper with this pastor and his wife, whose church they've closed down. And as we're traveling through these back roads, there's this guard tower and a gate. And the guards come out and they got their AK-47s and they got the uniforms on and they want to know where they're going and they want to see our passports and who are you going to see. And because everything was on the up and up, at the very end, you know what they said to us? You don't have enough seatbelts for the number of people in the car. That was their thing. They just wanted to intimidate. Ed?
Used to be a gate in Essex, they burned it down.
Yeah. I've read the sign on the wall. Yeah. So we get there and we have this meal with this family, and there's this little house beside their house. It's painted, it's in pristine condition. You could go and walk in it and walk around. You could do all that. It wasn't like it was guarded. That was their church. And it was empty now because one day a government official showed up and said, closed. Out in the middle of nowhere. But you could go downtown Camagüey, you could go downtown Havana and see all kinds of big churches. Or you could go to a village. I mean, one village we went to, the house was at the front, the stable was at the back, and the church was in between. And the gringos come, and the pastor's two little girls are singing for us in Spanish, of which we don't understand a lick. And they're as nervous as all get out because gringos from Canada have come, right? And so they're singing for us. And while they're singing, these two little girls are singing this wonderful song in this place between, the house and the stall. And in the background, like there's a pig and like a donkey or something like that. And they're singing, and we're having church, and it was awesome. So it wasn't that you couldn't preach the gospel there. It wasn't that you couldn't have church. It was just that the government every once in a while wanted you to know who's boss. And they'd come around and they'd just shut you down because they could. It was just random, right? When you see that, you know that lines are crossed, right? You're no longer rendering unto Caesar. Caesar just takes. So, I mean, again, they're very clear lines, but it's challenging. It's challenging as we're hoping that our government is looking out for us and cares about us and cares about everybody, and it has nothing to do with religion or race or creed or color. We're just trying to keep everybody safe, hang in there till things get better, so to speak, right? That's what we're hoping, right? That's what we're hoping. I know the longer it goes, there's more and more doubt, but that's what we're hoping. Any other thoughts on that? I know I rabbit trailed. Any thoughts from Facebook, or is everybody quiet there? Have they all nodded off already? Fallen asleep? That's okay.
We actually got an all-time high tonight.
Oh, do you? Oh, an all-time high. What's an all-time high?
10.
Woo! Board told me I get $500 for each person, so that's $5,000. Thank you, Carmen. Render under Brent what is Brent's. Yeah. Okay. Good. Well, hey, you throw it out there. You try. Any other thoughts on that? Seriously. So let's talk about less confusing things. Marriage and the resurrection. I'm going to read this again so the Facebook Live folks can hear it. I would normally have you read it, but they couldn't hear that. It would just be a lot of silence for them or muted sound. So let me do it. Then the Sadducees, who say there's no resurrection. So the Sadducees are the more liberal part, small l, more liberal part of the Jewish religious hierarchy. They're not a lot into supernatural stuff and resurrection and miracles, and that's not their thing. We would consider them, in our day and age, they would be leading the mainline churches. Can I say that on Facebook Live? Without retribution? That's how we would characterize them today. Then the Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, came to him with the question, Teacher, they say, that's a sign of respect. Rabbi, Rabboni. Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies and leaves a wife but no children, the man must marry the widow and have children for his brother. Now that's true. That's Old Testament stuff. So, Gary's married to Ida. They're 20 years old. Gary gets hit by a bus. They have no kids. Right? Oh, no, I guess it's not Gary that gets... let's make sure I get this right. Yeah. Gary gets hit by a bus. Sorry, Gary. Gary gets hit by a bus and has no kids. So, under Mosaic law, what's supposed to happen? His brother, next in line, is supposed to marry Ida and give Gary's line at least one child. The child belongs to Gary's line. Right? Now, in our day and age, in Canada in 2020, that's just a little weird. Right? That's just a little weird. It's weird. But that's the way it was, right? Because the whole idea was you did not want a line, a Jewish line, or a family in a Jewish tribe. You did not want the tribe to die out. And that's why when Benjamin goes crazy and rebels against the rest of Israel, and a lot of Benjamin gets wiped out, they allow the wives of the Benjamites to intermarry with others in order to keep lines alive, because God doesn't want a line in Israel to get extinguished, right? We have some sensitivity to that even in our day and age. If you're in a family that, there's no sons, the family name, and I realize it's 2020, not everybody's into that. But nonetheless, traditionally, if the family name isn't carried on, it's kind of a sad thing, right?
Growing up, when I was in Germany, I had a classmate, and from his mother's side, there was a son in that family, and there was no boy. So he had his last name changed. Like the family decided to change his last name so that this name wouldn't die out.
Really, eh?
Yeah.
Interesting.
So he
Yeah.
took on his grandfather's last name instead of his father's.
Right.
Just because.
So what we're hearing here in the room for those on Facebook Live is that, in a family where the name was going to die out, one of them had their name changed to carry on the family name. So you see that. You see, like, even in our day and age, again, and I realize traditions have changed. Many women don't take kind of the male name, or it's it's a hyphenated name or whatever. Like it's a different day, obviously. But back in these days, they didn't want the line dying out. So it was your brother's obligation to make sure that you had an heir, right? So that's where this is all coming from.
What if he only had one son, and he wouldn't have an heir?
There's always ramifications if you keep going on. You have to keep going on. So let me get back to the whole idea, right? Because they're trying to mess with Jesus again. Now there were 7 brothers, perfect number. The first one married and died without leaving any children. The second one married the widow, but he also died, leaving no children. It was the same with the third. Just so you know, there's a footnote down at the bottom, and it said that she often cooked wild mushrooms. Because you're wondering, right? What's happening to all these guys? They're eating wild mushrooms, right? In fact, none of the 7 left any children. Last of all, the woman died too. Well, God bless her. If I had I think that's a gift. It's like, again, don't take this literalistically. It's just they're trying to trap Jesus. It's a story.
I don't know if I would have survived 7 husbands.
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm thinking. I can imagine. Yeah, wow.
Fucking the other way around.
I think anyway, this is just bad. Yeah. Last of all, the woman died too. God bless her. At the resurrection, right? And they don't believe in a resurrection. At the resurrection, whose wife will she be, since she was married to the 7th? Now, this falls under the category of just a really dumb question, right? This is just dumb, right? This is just the Sadducees who don't believe in the resurrection. They're are trying to create a hypothetical situation that is going to put Jesus in a really difficult place because of this story, right? Like, what are the chances, first of all, of this happening? Like 0, right? Even Elizabeth Taylor didn't have that many husbands, right?
Pretty close.
Was it close? I'm too young to remember.
Yeah, CPP.
Yeah. Actually, we were at the Tabernacle of Spring Bay Camp. True story. And some lady came up to Karen, because Taylor's named Taylor, at Spring Bay Camp, at a Pentecostal camp, and said, "Did you name Taylor after Elizabeth Taylor?" At a Pentecostal camp. I didn't even know you could say Elizabeth Taylor's name at a Pentecostal camp. Not exactly an example, right? But anyways, yeah, she actually asked us that. I'm still like, and she was from Sault Ste. Marie, just in case you're wondering. Are you not an heir because you don't know the scriptures or the power of God? It's one of my favorite scripture verses when I want to zip somebody. When the dead rise, they will neither marry nor be given in marriage. They will be like angels in heaven. Here's your chance, Karen. Be like angels in heaven. Right? Now about the dead rising, have you not read in the book of Moses, in the account of the bush, how God said to him, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living. And Jesus says to them, you are badly mistaken. So he doesn't deal with the hypothetical because it's just ridiculous. Like, it's not how things work. It's not how things work in heaven. It's got nothing to do with the resurrection, right? It's just got nothing to do with nothing. But the point of this, and there is a point of this, once you get through all the crazy stuff the Sadducees ask on their hypothetical, never going to happen situation, is that God is a God of the living. Not the dead. God never speaks of people like Moses or Jacob or Abraham or any of them as in the past complete tense. It's like they're alive and well today. They're just in another place, in another form that we aren't yet, right? But he's a God of the living. Abraham is still alive. Isaac is still alive. Jacob is still alive. I mentioned to you, I think at the beginning of this when we were talking with, a good friend of our family passed away a few days ago. They're going to celebrate his life on Saturday. He's not dead. He's alive.
His body is dead.
Yeah, his body's in the ground. Big deal. To be absent from the body, is... How many times have I said that to you, right? Because I always want to breathe hope and faith into you folks. Those of you that have lost a loved one. And I know it hurts, and I know it tugs at your heart. And I know we got people in the room that have lost somebody not that long ago. But if they love Jesus, they're still alive. To be absent from the bodies, be present with the Lord. They're with Jesus. Like they're whole again, right? He's a God of the living. And at the resurrection, now if you want detailed teaching on the resurrection, 1 Corinthians 15 is the chapter to go. Now, we're not doing a study on the resurrection. We're just working our way through Mark. But, everything you need to know about the resurrection is found in 1 Corinthians 15. So, Jesus just rejects this whole idea of like, well, whose wife they're going to be and, whose husband they're going to be and blah, blah, blah. That's just crazy talk. It's got nothing to do with eternity. But God is a God of the living. Heaven is not a graveyard. Heaven is not a graveyard. Any other thoughts on that? Just be hopeful about that.
How did the dead rise from the graves? Okay, so they get new bodies, but they're all alive.
You will get a new body when you receive your glorified body. That will be later, right? The dead in Christ, 1 Thessalonians 4, in and around verse 16 and forward, right? Dead in Christ shall rise first. Then after that, we are alive and remain. We caught up to meet the Lord in the air, right? And so shall we be with the Lord forever.
Where will we be rising from?
Well, your body will be glorified, so the rising from, I would be assuming, would be from your place of death, where your remains are, I would guess. Although here's the thing I don't understand about all this. These days people get cremated and they have their stuff spread all over lakes and ball fields and that. So God's got to figure it out. I know it says we'll be caught up to meet the Lord in the air, and we will be changed.
It will all shed off us.
Yeah, I mean, there used to be a place where you could find people, eh? Now, not so much. Yeah. God's got it all figured out.
Rising sort of gives me the impression of rising from the grave.
Well, I think, again, so when it talks about we who are alive and remain will be caught up to meet the Lord in the air, there is, for those that are alive when Jesus comes, there will be. You will be,
Right.
But it also talks about, like Jesus rising from the dead in the sense that the body was dead. It was put to the ground from the dust you were made, to the dust you will return. So I think it just speaks in that sense, not necessarily of a particular geographic place, Gary, but from the ground. We were created from the ground, and we will rise from the ground, wherever that ground is. I think that's all it's implied there.
That be at the time will be dead.
No, as soon as you, like, let's say I shot you dead right now. Sorry.
I hate that when you do that.
Yeah, I know. But I mean, your spirit, your soul, that part of you which is spirit and soul goes to be with Jesus. But you will receive a glorified body later. Yeah.
Like in Europe, the grave sites, they're only good for 25 years.
Oh, yeah.
And then you can buy again for 25 years.
Oh,
But if you don't, they bury somebody else in your spot.
yeah. Limited space.
It's limited space.
Yeah.
You have,
Hopefully they have a sale on.
no, there's no sale.
So I got to stop because it's 7:31, so I got to wrap her up. So we'll say goodbye to Facebook Live. We will carry this conversation on, but we'll carry it on with everybody next week, okay? So bye for now. God bless you guys.